Hi, I'm Sean, one of the news editors at Manx Radio. As we've been hearing over the weekend, Crogga has decided not to proceed with its project to attempt to extract gas from around the island's coast. This morning on Manx Radio Breakfast, myself and Alex were joined by the Infrastructure Minister Michelle Haywood to discuss the announcement from Crogga. Dr Haywood also discussed the conditions in Douglas Harbour which have had an impact on the steam packet's sailing schedule.
In fact, it's not the DOI that didn't renew the licence. DOI offered Crogga an extension to their licence, and this will be the fifth extension that we've agreed to since we first granted the licence to them. Back in December, we offered an extension to the licence, and that was based on that they wanted to vary the phases of what they were doing. So they wanted to do the test drill before they did the seismic. They, at the last hour on that, said, no, we don't want to do that. Can we go back to our original licence? And so we said, OK, so we'll go away and we'll change all of the contract that we've been preparing. And we gave ourselves a couple of months to get that changed and to agree with them. And they wouldn't agree to the terms that we thought were necessary to put round that extension. And so they have decided not to sign the extension. It's not us withdrawing it.
Did Crogga lobby Tynwald members for progress on this subject? What correspondence have you as Minister had with the company?
Yes, there was a letter from the Crogga that went through a former MHK sent to all of Tynwald around this, and that was what provoked Miss Edge trying to bring an urgent motion last week. And I think one of the problems around that motion that might not have been understood was at that time legal teams from both sides are in discussions about highly technical contractual matters, and having a debate around that would have really not helped matters at all, because there were lots of very nuanced positions that were being argued legally, and it really wouldn't have been helpful to the department or to Crogga to have that debate.
And what is the current position going forward in terms of looking for gas fields in the future? We know there was a resolution in Tynwald in July 2022 that perhaps makes it difficult for another company to come in and look for this.
So as we stand at the moment, Crogga's licence fell away just before midnight on Friday. There is a Tynwald declaratory motion that says no further hydrocarbon licences will be issued. But I think the important thing to say is that the asset, if it exists, and that there are conflicting opinions about how much gas might be down there. Certainly there is some gas down there. How much and whether it flows at a rate that would make it commercially exploitable, that's still a matter for opinion. But Tynwald have said no more hydrocarbon licences. That's a position that Tynwald could change its mind on in the future. That's not something that is set in stone. It's just a Tynwald declaration.
Now, Minister, I'm going to sort of deal with the areas that we hear a lot on your sort of social media chats and the kind of down the pub questions. In terms of what could possibly be there, of course, everyone sees pound signs, and of course we hear from the government about how we don't have enough money for this, and a lot of people see this as the goose that could lay the golden egg. But some people suggest that because Moore Vannin has plans for an offshore wind farm in a similar area to that which Crogga wants to operate, this could be part of the reason that progress was not made. What do you say to those people?
There is an overlapping lease on the seabed, and about 90% of the areas overlap. If Crogga had stuck to their original licence and the original timeframes, they would have been in Phase C of their licence, which was a 4-year period from December 21 running forward to the end of this year, at which point they would have drilled their wellheads and they would have known exactly where they were going. The fact that they have asked for extension after extension and not delivered the 3D seismic and not progressed to drilling a test well is really down to them as a company. You know, we have issued the licence to them repeatedly to allow them to get on with that, and they could have done. So the decisions, although the discussions around having Moore Vannin in the same space, really from January onwards, that was a clear part. There's always been there've always been clauses in some of the licences that have been issued on the seabed about coexistence, and Crogga have known about that, and they didn't walk away in January 24 when we said, OK, and this has to be part of the conditions of the licence. So they've waited right the way through till this year to decide that might be a problem for them.
So in terms of, once again, very layman speak here, when it comes to, it looks from the outside as if someone somewhere has been dragging their heels, because it does seem to be something that's been going on and on and on with no action being taken. Where would you say that fault lies, as in where are the heels being dragged?
Crogga should have been doing their seismic survey in 2019. So late 2019 into 2020, that should have been their next phase. Then they should have moved on to doing their test drills. And the fact that they as a company have not delivered on that time frame, I think the department has been very reasonable in giving them extension after extension after extension. And I feel a bit like I'm back in my school teacher days. No, you can't have another extension on your homework. But actually they just needed to get on with it when they had the licence.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Moving on to another news story that hit over the weekend, which of course was the Manxman had difficulty berthing over the weekend in terms of running aground in Douglas Harbour. Now, the Sea Services Agreement states a depth of about 6 metres, at least 6 metres should be maintained, and a berth of 5 metres in front of the number 1 link span, which is where the Manannan sits, and 6.5 metres in front of the number 5 link span, where the Manxman and the Benmacree regularly sit. What is the depth of these areas? Because it's been suggested that possibly Douglas Harbour has not been dredged to the correct depth.
I think it's true to state, and everyone knows we haven't done a capital dredge, so to get the really big specialist dredgers in to Douglas Harbour for nearly 20 years, and that is true. It's at the moment we have very preliminary data over that, and it's not calibrated sounders, so I can't guarantee what the depth is. What we know is that the location where the obstruction seems to be is a fairly muddy bottom, and it's river deposits. So as the river comes out and kind of swings, some of it passes a little bit through the breakwater, and some of it turns around the harbour, and there's a slowdown in water flow there, and so it tends to deposit material out of that. So when we've had lots of rainfall like we have on some of the storms, we are going to get that sediment forming in the harbour.
Now, I appreciate, obviously, you've not been in the job very long as the Minister, but in terms of looking back and the maintenance of Douglas Harbour, we used to have our own dredgers that used to scoop and clear Douglas Harbour. We don't have that anymore. I know we've been doing ploughing dredging to a degree. Is there any long-term plan? Because I'd imagine, and I'm taking the steam packet's point in this question, that if they've signed a Sea Services agreement that states the harbour should be this depth, that it's not necessarily their fault that their boat then effectively runs aground if it's too shallow.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a combination. It was a perfect combination of the very big spring tides at the moment. So you had very low water, and in fact, this situation arises in a month's time, and the water is even lower. And it's the timing of when the boat's coming into harbour that hits at that low water on the spring tides. Plus, there was high atmospheric pressure as well. So that's acted to lower the water even further. When you get a vessel operating very close to the seabed, you almost get a suction effect that pulls it down towards the seabed as well. So that sinking effect, squat effect, indeed. Yeah, the squat effect, that also kicks in. We know it's a soft bottom down there. We do know it's an issue, and I am meeting with officers this morning. There was lots of correspondence backwards and forwards, and I've said I need an immediate fix. What can we do with the equipment that we have, and what do we need to do to get a longer fix on it? And I think it's likely to mean that we will be getting that capital dredge programme underway. But it's one of those things that, at times when money is tight, that everyone thinks, oh, well, we dredged it last year, it's okay, we'll push it away, and it'll probably be okay. And actually, I think we're probably getting to the position that we've shown absolutely with our friends at the steam packet that it's not probably okay at the moment.
We should point out, of course, we thank you for coming in this morning, because you just got off the overnight boat, and we can report it did arrive on time. So
it did arrive on time, and I sat and watched it backing into the berth and thought, just keep moving, which we did. So we were absolutely fine this morning, but the tides have moved on timing.
We appreciate you coming in this morning. A couple of quick questions whilst we have you here. Thank you to Andrea, who says, can you ask Michelle Haywood how the transfer of patient transport from DOI to Manx Care is progressing? This kind of falls into the comment she says about how Alf Cannon, when he was interim minister 2 years ago, said that the DOI needed to be reduced in size, and this was one of the proposals. So how is the reduction in size going? How is that move of patient transfer going? So
some of the reduction in size is moving along. Port Security have transferred over to the constabulary. So that's already happened. Patient transfer and the supply of transport to schools, we're working with both DESC and DHSC to look at both of those. And the patient transfer project, I was discussing it last week, it is moving ahead. We just need to examine the impact on patients of transferring the services back to Manx Care.
I do think, to be fair, that we all talk about at the DOI. I myself have been on air and be very critical about the DOI, but in terms of the size and scale of it, you can reduce the size of it, but people still expect the services that are provided by it.
Yeah, and I think one of my takes on having gone into the department is it's such a diverse department, all doing very different things in very different bits, that I'm actually looking at a bigger top-down project of how to sort that out and to separate, to get better governance, to give people who are working within each area, each sort of scope, agency to work within that, because actually there isn't a lot of crossover between some of the areas of DOI, and we do have a number of services that sit across us. So we are working on improving governments to make it flow better and to make the services better to the end user.
Just finishing with a last couple of questions about Crogga. You talked about the various delays that happened there, the extensions of the licence. They themselves cited the lack of legislation, the regulatory framework that needed to be in place. Why did they have a licence, essentially, without those being in place in the first place?
So when Crogga originally applied for the licence, everyone knows what our legislation looks like. It's published on a website. You can go and look up the legislation. And they knew when they applied for that licence that they were dealing with a jurisdiction that had the legislation that it had at the time. Their expectation has always been that we would lift UK legislation, and indeed that is pretty much what we would do, with the tweaks on it to make it so that it was applicable to the Isle of Man. We have worked with our partners in DFE and DEFRA. We have a whole, I can show you lists of legislation that we know we need and the timeframes by which all of those have been delivered. And we've committed significant resource into delivering that legislation, to the point of we've commissioned external drafters to help us with it, because we just don't have enough resource within the departments. So actually, government was on with that, and we had a plan that was delivering the legislation as it was needed by Crogga.
In July 2022, when Tynwald was discussing this and the issuing of further licences, you yourself said that sanctioning further extraction of fossil fuels is utterly incompatible with the need to achieve net zero. And you went on to say we need to ensure that we draw a line under fossil fuels with a clear statement. Is it fair to say that you yourself are very much against this project? They
would have had to have been, within the terms of the licence, they'd have had to have been off of the site by 2048 and stopping production. That aligns with our net zero targets about 2050, and I'm happy that the government is committed to those targets. I do believe that we can't keep chucking out fossil fuels, and I have some sympathy with the Keep It in the Ground campaign, because that does it. That hasn't affected any decisions that I've taken through this. As far as I'm concerned, this was a contractual thing between the government via the department and Crogga, and it was a licence that pre-existed. And there's quite a lot of my day job actually is dealing with things that happened long before I was in office, but dealing with them in a fair and equitable way and in a professional way to make sure that we get the best resolution for all parties.
Dr. Michelle Haywood, thank you very much for coming in this morning. We really appreciate you coming and talking to us and taking a lot of questions. I've got a final one in from Andrea, who sent you the patient transfer question. I would presume that this has got something to do with her life, saying, thank you for asking that question. If you get a chance, could you ask if it's going to happen by the 1st of April 2025? So effectively in a month's time, that transfer.
Originally, the department expected it to happen by April 2024, and it was delayed, and 25 was the backstop. I think realistically, I am not convinced that it will happen by the 1st of April 2025, but it is an active and ongoing work stream to try and get that transferred back. And it's really about the quality of service, because I can provide buses and bus drivers, but I can't provide the medical support and the care support that those patients need when they're using the services. So this is really talking about the quality of service and the safety of the patients. So I'm committed that it is going to move back to Manx Care, and we're just working through the logistics of that now.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Manx Radio Newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.